Hi, I'm David Dobson, and welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Dr. Cherie Enns. We will be discussing her PhD research on children's rights and displacement in East Africa. Cherie is an associate professor at the School of Land Use and Environment Change at the University of the Fraser Valley. She holds a PhD in international policy and program management from Ardhi University in Tanzania. It's a great pleasure to have you with me today, Cherie.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be asked to participate in your videos or your YouTube channel.
To start off, could you please explain to us what spatial justice is?
So spatial justice is not my term. It's sort of manipulated by me, I guess, if you will, but geographers such as David Harvey or Soja have used it to talk about the relationship between fair and equitable distribution of opportunities for people within the context of place. So, if you look at urban form or development, there's values that are reflected in the built form. For example, in any community, what is at the center of that community? If it's a place of worship, is it a marketplace? It tells you something about what's important. So I'm really interested in landform that tells a story of justice.
Okay. So why it is important in regional and urban planning decisions?
Well, often planning decisions favor those with more resources. Those who are, have a lot of power in society. When decisions are made for transportation, freeways, they often don't go through the more rich communities, as a very simple example. So spatial justice requires us to take into account the most vulnerable.
Your PhD research focused on children's rights, land use policy, and resettlement challenges children face within East Africa. What draw your interest in this subject area?
Yeah, I guess at my stage in life, it's been a journey. So it began with being raised as a child in East Africa. And then over the last 15 or so years, having the privilege to work in refugee settlements in the context of resettlement.
Maybe you can talk about what did you learn in your research?
Well, I think sometimes as researchers, you start thinking you have the answers, which is not really the right way to start. Maybe with hypothesis. But I certainly felt, because of the context, I had been in Somalia and Southern Sudan, Northern Uganda, I could see the challenges that children were facing. So if I could in some way amplify their story or tell the story in the way that professionals could listen and integrate into urban planning, I was hopeful that I could have some kind of effect change. So what did I learn? I learned how the children felt about community, how the children were challenged, and how they perceived the issues.
What advice would you give to policy planners and researchers who want to carry on similar type of work?
Yeah, well, the concept of child rights is often reflected in high-level policy. So we have the human rights, or we have the Convention on the Rights of the Welfare of the Child. In the African context, we have African charters. But how does that filter into land use planning and land use policies? And most often their voice or their concepts or their ideas are ignored or very adult-centric. So my main advice is to look for ways to integrate their values and voice into resettlement plans, in this case, or into general land use plans.
And you also focused some of the other issues like climate change and COVID and other social issues. Can you talk about a little bit, if possible?
Well, I did this work through a case study approach, and
Okay.
I worked on 3 case studies,
Okay.
one in refugee settlement due to
Okay.
conflict, so
Okay.
resettlement there of
Okay.
children. The
Okay.
second was a pandemic,
Yeah.
and not COVID per se, but
Okay.
HIV,
Okay.
looking at children being resettled into communities because their parents were no longer alive.
Okay.
And then the third case study was climate change, looking at flooding in a
Okay.
city
Okay.
where land use planning was done in
Mhm.
such a way that people
Mhm.
settled in areas of the city that made them very vulnerable. So
Okay.
children were resettled or with their families
Okay.
to a new area. So 3
Okay.
case studies of resettlement.
Okay. Okay. Did you find any similarities between these case studies, even though
Well,
they're different context?
yeah, I mean, so what I was able to do was a whole series of consultation with children, as
Mhm.
well as applying the lens of
Okay.
child rights.
Okay.
And so effectively in each community, decisions were made that directly affected and contravened the rights of the child. So
Okay.
the rights to access to education.
Mhm.
If you plan a community in a way when the river floods, the child can't get to school,
That's true.
then that violates their right to education.
Right.
So I was clearly able to illustrate the link between the law
Okay.
and what actually is planned for children, and the gaps and the
Okay.
challenges,
Okay.
because child's needs aren't at
Okay.
the center. Even
Okay.
building a school on higher ground.
Right.
So if there is flooding,
Yeah.
the child at least has a safe harbor to go to.
Okay. Did you give this recommendation to local authorities, or what happened to the results of your research?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the challenge. In the
Right.
context of each case study, the material, I worked with community leaders, community elders.
Okay.
So, or I worked with large international organizations such as Save the Children. So
Okay.
the one project actually was done for the World Humanitarian Summit. So that
Okay.
information was presented to the UN level, at the
Okay.
UN level. However,
Hmm.
having said that, working in teaching and training and working with planners within the region,
Right.
or I believe a bottom-up approach, especially integrated with education.
Okay.
So a lot of planners, when they're taught how to
Yes.
plan, how to design cities, the
Right.
child voice is just not at the table. So
Okay.
my big push there is more advocacy on
Okay.
the child's perspective.
So you are a professor at University of the Fraser Valley. How do you knowledge you learn in your research combine in your teaching?
Yeah, well, I'm very privileged to manage a program called the Queen Elizabeth Scholars, which
Okay.
is an international internship program.
Okay.
So in this summer, I have 8 more students going to East Africa, and they'll all be working in various ways in addressing climate change,
Okay.
communities, and development. So directly through mentorship,
Mhm.
but as well research projects funded by the International Development Research Center.
Okay.
So I have ongoing projects. I also have an advisory role with the
Okay.
UN Habitat on youth
Okay.
and space
That's great.
and public spaces.
It's very nice. And definitely you're doing very important work. Thank you for your time, Cherie, and I wish you all the best. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, take care. Thank you.